Yes, I think with that done, we can actually move on to the next case, which is trans man murdered during German Pride Parade, and I believe you're taking this one.
Yes. So Malte Say was a 25-year-old trans man who was attending this year's Christopher Street Day rally in Münster, northwest Germany, when he was beset upon by a man who proceeded to beat him unconscious. Both the man and the other person quickly fled the scene. Both the man and another person quickly fled the scene. The man assaulted Malte while he was attempting to stand up for two queer women who were being targeted with homophobic abuse by putting himself between them and the abusers. The attack put Malte in critical condition, leading to him passing away during the night of the 1st and 2nd of September. The Trans Intermünster Association, or TIMA, which Malte was part of, has organized several rallies and vigils in Malte's memory. Felix Adrian Schepper, the president of the TIMA, has stated the hostilities are increasing again. Mayor Marcus Lever ordered black ribbons to be displayed on all buildings and flagpoles in the city, adding that this horrible event shows that we still have to work harder for equality and acceptance of people of different sexual orientations. Police have since arrested a suspect on the 2nd of September after identifying him based on photos and videos provided by witnesses. So I believe the first 2 points to unpack were yours, Ethel.
Of course, the first one is the fact that a lot of this didn't get reported, either this case or the case of Rodrigo. I imagine that this stream is actually probably one of the first places that a lot of people have actually been hearing about what happened to Rodrigo. There was a movement surrounding Malta at one point where people began noting that nobody is really talking about this. Specifically, trans men began noting this, and then suddenly it started gaining more traction. But like that took a while to get, to take off, etc.
That's actually something I've noticed that happens in general. I'll probably talk about this a bit more later. Actually, I may as well talk about it now. Yeah, when trans men are harmed, either no one talks about it, even in the trans community, except for trans men, or people will talk about it but make it about themselves. So, for example, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade recently, I noticed that no one was taking the initiative to talk about how this was impacting trans men. They were only talking about how this was impacting cis women, which honestly, that was kind of a bit of a gut punch. And, I feel like when trans men did talk about it, they were either ignored or even outright attacked for that. And before that, there was the incident with the trans swimmers. And I remember seeing a few people who were talking about how the trans man swimmer was receiving hate and talking about how we live in such a misogynistic world. Look at all this misogyny. Look at how women are the victims when this trans man is receiving hate and transphobic violence. And there's very much this pattern of either erasure or decentering, or centering people who are not actually being targeted with this violence.
Another point is that Malta was murdered protecting others. They often, people talk about the way that apparently trans men and trans mass folks, like, they don't really care about the others in the community, but like here was someone who died protecting others, protecting two queer women. I say queer women, I don't say gay women, because we've had this issue with the papers before where there's been a lot of erasure around, ace and bisexual women. It is important to note this. And it's just, again, it's just something that has just been completely erased from the narrative. Sadly, there's a lot of very visible and not particularly nice trans men or trans masc individuals like Buck Angel that have come to kind of define the experience when they really shouldn't. We also have plenty of terrible trans women, but they don't define all trans women in the same way that people like Buck Angel have come to define trans men. So, it's worth noting that no, that's not the case. It is a big tragedy. This is a person who very clearly he gave everything to everyone else, and sadly, in this case, it cost him his life.
Yeah.
That said, I'm sorry, going to say expectations of trans.
Oh yeah. Did you have anything else to add on that point, or should I?
No, you can lead into it. I was going to say that there's almost this desire for trans men or demand for trans men to prove that they're better. Like they shouldn't have to, but sadly that is there. So you're going to lead into
yeah.
that.
Right. Yes. So this is not entirely a one-to-one sort of thing with what happens in Malte. But I could not help but think about something I've noticed is that there's very often an expectation and a demand for trans men to use our male privilege to stand up to bigots, particularly cis men. Usually it's more you have a duty as a man with your male privilege now to stand up to misogynists, but I feel like that this expectation can also extend to other forms of bigotry as well.
But it's also important to note that this is what that can result in,
Yeah.
People act like if trans men step in, they're completely safe, and this shows that that's just not the case.
Well, yeah, the thing is, when I saw people saying this thing of, trans men need to stand up and hold cis men accountable, I thought that's really dangerous, but I couldn't really think of how to explain why. And I think that this shows the potential harm. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Malte wouldn't have died if not for this expectation, because it sounds like Malte is very much a very brave and heroic person who would have put himself in that situation. I mean, he would have put himself in that situation, whether he was expected to or not. Yeah, very altruistic. And also, it's unclear exactly why he was targeted, whether he was specifically, his assailant saw him as a trans man or just saw that he was connected to this queer movement, this event. But I can think of several ways where being a trans man possibly made him more vulnerable. One is that when I was reading the specifics of what happened, it sounds like, according to the papers, he basically said to this man, stop being awful to those women. And then that man immediately punched him in the face. And I think in most cases, cis men do not immediately get attacked when they call other cis men out. And the other thing is cis men have a lot more practice with reading each other's body language, are much more familiar with what it looks like when a cis man is going to be violent. And so would be more likely to know, is this a fight worth fighting, or is this going to put me in a bad spot? Cis men have more practice with physical altercations, probably more likely to have roughhoused as children and teenagers. And so they're more adept at defending themselves if things do get violent, probably more adept at de-escalating as well, because of extra practice with that. And of course, trans men in most cases are not necessarily weaker, but smaller than cis men as well. And so there's lots of reasons why trying to stand up to a cis man or call a cis man out can be very dangerous and even deadly. And even if things don't get physically violent, trans men still are not going to be are not going to know how to talk to cis men and how to and understand those power dynamics as well. And cis men may be able to tell, even if they don't know exactly why, this man isn't like other men and may be more likely to be violent or bigoted. And so if you go around saying trans men need to hold cis men accountable, otherwise they're not good allies, whatever that's supposed to mean, you could get someone seriously hurt or even killed. And this, I wish we as a community could talk about this more and understand this vulnerability instead of just assuming, oh, trans men are basically just cis men who happen to be trans. And the fact that we don't talk about this and the fact that we're often not allowed to talk about this, unfortunately, it's this never-ending cycle because we never have that illusion of privilege challenged. And so people go around saying, this could never happen because you're privileged.
Yeah.
And I believe we had some people in response to this basically saying that.
First, I'd like to read out Gray Snyder. Cis men have a responsibility to stand up to cis men. Christ. Yeah. Like it has to come from within the house. It's really not on to expect trans men to sort cis men out. Especially considering that trans men suffer so much abuse at cis men as well.
Well,
we'll come back
personally, I have tried to call cis men out. And even I had one case where I wasn't even calling a cis man out. I was just talking about some stuff, and a cis man came to me. And when I didn't agree with him, he was really abusive. And then another time I tried calling a cis man out, and he was like, oh, you're a man as well, so, agree with me. And I was like, no, you're wrong, and you're being really misogynistic. And then he was really abusive. And so, I do call cis men out, and they end up treating me like absolute shit. And they don't behave any better.
Yeah, there's this idea of trans men as disposable, which is a sickening feeling, this idea that like they either don't matter or they'll be perfectly fine, which again, perfectly fine does not stand up to actually what we see, etc. But they should just like throw themselves at the system, and it's like that's just such a horrific way to look at things, But yes,
and also I kind of was hinting at it before, but I guess I want to be explicit about this as well. Is there's this idea that trans men are allies and not fellow queer people, not fellow oppressed people who are also being hurt and also being targeted and also suffering. There's this idea that trans men do not have a stake in these issues and also owe people labor because there's this idea that you're not affected by this, you don't have a stake in this. We're being treated like allies when we're being hurt just as badly and sometimes even worse than the people who are demanding this quote unquote allyship.
There's an alienation not just from the community but your own trauma. There's a degree of separation that's enforced. It's not naturally occurring, it's enforced.